Welcome back to the channel. Thank y'all for hanging with me on this Thursday. So I'm going to give you a modification on a frog when you're fishing around heavy cover. Frog season is upon us. Basically in bass fishing, anytime you have a big transition, which is typically a tough time of year to fish because you don't have a bunch of fish doing one thing. Therefore, they're going to be spread out. This happens in the pre-spawn, right before they spawn. This happens in the post-spawn after they get done spawning, and also in the summer to fall part of the year. So right now we're in that fall transition. Bass can be anywhere. Typical fall fishing where they're going to be spread out. Where you typically catch them on this spot or this spot, they're going to be using the entire area. And that makes it hard, but that makes it also a good time to throw a frog. So I'm going to give you my modifications when those fish start using the slop, they start using decaying plant, matted vegetation, they start using heavy cover, and bait can be anywhere. Bluegills are going to thrive in that type of area, and bass are going to be around. There's also going to be crawfish. There's going to be everything that the bass needs, especially this time of year. So I'm going to give you a couple of modifications on your frog when you're fishing around heavy cover. Now, the downside of this whole situation is when you start putting BBs in your frog, you start adding rattles and weight to it. The frog is not going to be able to be fished around bushes, laydowns, some type of wood, sparse cover where you don't have the frog sitting on top of something. It's going to sink. Therefore, this is strictly for heavy cover. So let's dive into the most easy adjustment you can make on your frog is BBs. So you can find BBs pretty much everywhere. You add a few, add a couple more, add another one until you get your frog the weight that you want. Now, there's a couple benefits to adding BBs. The first one is that frog is going to be pushing down on that vegetation. That's what you want. You want there to be a trail coming back to the boat. So anytime you have slop and your frog is sitting in it, you want there to be an open space behind the frog. That's going to help the bass track your frog. He's going to be able to see that line and see the sunshine coming through and be able to figure out where your frog is at. That's why color's not always super important when you're fishing heavy vegetation. It's more so about getting the fish's attention through the frog pushing down on the mat and causing a trail. Now, you're also going to realize that these matted vegetation areas are sometimes miles back where the fish can go. So you need to make a really long cast. So adding a couple more BBs, could be a quarter of an ounce, could be a half of an ounce. Getting your frog beefed up to an ounce and a half, you can throw it a far away. You can throw it a long way. The last thing is sometimes those BBs are going to make noise. So I have a bunch of BBs in here. You can kind of, I guess the microphone's right here. You can kind of hear them. Not really, but it makes a little bit of a noise. More noise than you have just your normal frog. Now, that's going to bring me to my next point. You can add rattles. So the easiest way to do this would just to find those old plastic worm rattles, and you can just insert them inside the frog, or you can put them in the legs. Now, inserting them in the frog is going to kind of muzzle that sound. Most of this purpose of this is to get the sound. So you can put them in the legs. Now, the downside of that is super glue might not keep them in there. So Jordan Lee taught us this a couple years ago, is you can take jig rattles, which I don't know if you've seen these. It goes above your rubber band on your jig skirt, and they stay on there. They make a lot of noise. They're always moving and clacking. I like put those rattles on my jig anytime the water's super cold. But now you can take these. Now here's the same type of jig rattle that you have on your jig. There they are. They're on that little collar, and you can just pop them right off. So they come off there, and they have that little edge, that little divot there, and that's going to help them hold a little bit better when you pop them in there. So a drop of super glue. Again, this was Jordan Lee taught us this, a drop of super glue, and that is your finished product right there. So you can kind of hear that noise. It's not muzzled by being inside the frog body. It's on the outside. And again, always short legs. So pretty much anytime I'm frog fishing, I trim my legs down really short. Even shorter when I'm fishing matted vegetation. But those are some good ways to add some extra weight. And again, this is that time of year where the bass are going to use every bit of the lake in the shallow parts of it. So the parts of it where in the pre-spawn or the spawn, they're not going to go way, way back there. They're going to be on the edge in the pre-spawn, and they're going to use the front of the flat in the spawn, but they're not always going to push way back in there because they're going to be worried about if it rains, muddy water getting into their eggs, getting into their spawning areas. So they're typically on the outsides of the flats during the spawn. But this period of time, bait's trying to get away. They're after the bait. The bait's going to swim at ends to get away from them. So they're going to be pushing them way back in there. There's not a whole lot of baits in your tackle box that can get to those fish. That's why the frog becomes so important. And again, there's a couple different times a year where I really like the frog. When the fishing's really good and I don't have to worry about how many bites I'm getting. When the fishing's really tough and I'm struggling to figure out a way to get a big bite. So I just fish for 5 fish all day and use baits that allure to big fish. Therefore, those big bites will kind of come when I need them. Or anytime you have a transition period. Because transition periods mean you don't really know what to throw. You don't really have a specific bait that works. You don't have fish that are just all in the pre-spawn. You don't have fish that are all in the spawn. There's a mix. So go for fish that are hard to catch, but it's going to be the bigger fish. And a frog is just one of those baits that typically catches big fish. The downside is you're going to lose a lot of fish on the frog. You're going to have a lot of fish that don't connect. But when you're around matted vegetation in this situation, adding the rattles, adding the weight so they can get it a little bit better. It's going to be easier for them to grab onto when it's a little heavier, and it's going to be down in the mat a little bit more where they can get it. That's going to help your hookup percentage, and it's going to help you put more big fish in the boat this time of year. So try that, guys. Good luck to you, and I'll see you on the water.